The first day at the new job was overwhelming. The office buzzed with energy, employees moved with purpose, and the weight of expectations settled heavily on my shoulders. I had worked hard to earn this position, and I wasn't going to let nerves get in the way. But nothing could have prepared me for her. She wasn't just my boss. She was magnetic. Confidence radiated from her in a way that made people stop and listen. The moment she walked into the room, conversations hushed. She commanded respect effortlessly, not just because of her authority, but because of the way she carried herself. And then, unexpectedly, her gaze met mine. For a brief moment, I felt singled out in a room full of people. Her dark eyes held mine just long enough for me to question whether I imagined it. But the moment passed, and she continued speaking, her voice steady, composed. As days went by, I noticed the subtle ways she interacted with me, ways that felt different from how she treated the others. It was nothing inappropriate, nothing overt. Just small things. A lingering glance during meetings, a slight smile when our eyes met across the room, the way her hand would rest near mine when we worked late in her office. At first, I dismissed it as overthinking. She was a powerful woman in a high-ranking position. Maybe she was just naturally charismatic. But as time passed, the moments between us became harder to ignore. One evening, after everyone else had left, she called me into her office. My heart pounded as I stepped inside, unsure of what to expect. The room was dimly lit, the city skyline stretching out behind her. She leaned against her desk, arms crossed, studying me. "You've been doing great work," she said, her voice softer than usual. "Thank you," I replied, keeping my tone professional. She hesitated, as if choosing her words carefully. "You remind me of myself when I was starting out, driven, ambitious." There was something personal in her words, something beyond the usual workplace praise. I nodded, unsure how to respond. Silence stretched between us, thick with something unspoken. And then, just as quickly as the moment had come, she shifted back into her composed self. She handed me some documents, her fingers brushing mine briefly. "Review these before tomorrow's meeting," she said, her tone back to business. I nodded, taking the papers and stepping out of her office, my mind racing. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed between us. It was subtle just beneath the surface, but it was there. And no matter how much I tried to ignore it, I knew this was only the beginning. The late nights in her office became a pattern. At first, they were strictly professional, long discussions about projects, strategies, and company goals. But over time, the conversations drifted into something more personal. She would ask about my life outside of work, my dreams, my past. I found myself opening up in ways I hadn't expected. She listened with an intensity that made me feel seen, truly seen. And then, she would share things about herself, stories of struggles she faced as a woman in leadership, the sacrifices she made to reach where she was. There was a weight in her words, a vulnerability she didn't show to anyone else. Or, at least, that's what I believed. The air between us grew heavier with every meeting. Her presence was intoxicating. The way she looked at me when I spoke, the way she would lean in just slightly when I answered. Every small action felt like it carried meaning. Yet, neither of us crossed the line. One evening, after a particularly long day, she brought out a bottle of wine. To celebrate the success of the project, she said with a soft smile. I hesitated, but she poured 2 glasses anyway. "One drink won't hurt," she added. We talked, laughed even, the usual professional walls dissolving into something more personal. The tension between us thickened, like an unspoken promise hanging in the air. At one point, she reached for my glass at the same time I did, our fingers brushing. The moment lingered. Her eyes held mine, something unreadable flickering in them. I felt my pulse quicken. The office, the job, the rules, none of it seemed to matter in that instant. But just as the moment seemed to tip over into something irreversible, she pulled back. Clear her throat. "It's late," she said, her voice carefully composed. "You should get some rest." The spell broke, reality flooding back in. I nodded, setting my glass down and standing up. As I reached for the door, she spoke again, softer this time. "You're different," she said. "And that scares me." I turned, but she was already looking away, pretending to focus on the documents in front of her. I left her office that night with my mind spinning. What did she mean? Was she warning me? Or herself? I told myself I needed to be careful. But deep down, I already knew I was too far gone to turn back now. The illusion shattered in an instant. One moment, I was caught in the intensity of what we were. The next, I was staring at undeniable proof that I had been nothing more than a temporary distraction. It happened by accident. A co-worker casually mentioned her upcoming wedding, assuming I already knew. My stomach dropped. I forced a smile, acting as if the news didn't send a shockwave through me. But inside, everything unraveled. That night, I did what I knew I shouldn't. I searched for confirmation. Social media made it easy. Pictures of her with him, their hands intertwined, smiles that told a story I hadn't been a part of. The captions spoke of love, of commitment, of a future they had planned together. Every moment we had shared replayed in my mind, now tainted with betrayal. The long stares, the late nights, the almost confessions. Had any of it been real? Or had I been a convenient escape from a life she wasn't willing to leave? Anger burned through the heartbreak. I couldn't just let it go. I needed to hear it from her. The office was empty when I walked in, just the way I wanted it. She looked up from her desk as I entered, surprise flickering across her face. But when she saw the storm in my eyes, she knew. "You lied to me," I said, voice steady despite the chaos inside me. She sighed, setting her pen down. "I never lied. Then what would you call this?" I pulled out my phone, the screen still open to a picture of her and him. She didn't flinch. "I never promised you anything." The words cut deeper than I expected. "You made me believe I meant something." "You do," she said softly, but there was no conviction in it. Just regret. But this was never going to be more than what it was. I let out a bitter laugh. "And what was it to you?" Silence. That was my answer. I should have walked away then, but I needed her to feel what I was feeling. "Did you ever think about what this would do to me? Or was I just convenient?" She exhaled, looking down at her desk. "I never wanted to hurt you, but you did." Another silence, heavier this time. She looked up, and for the first time, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. Fear. Not of me, but of what she had allowed to happen. "I can't change what's real," she said finally. I nodded, stepping back. "Neither can I." And with that, I turned and walked out, leaving behind the pieces of whatever we had been. The weight of it all settled in as I stepped out of the office for the last time. The air outside felt different, colder, sharper, as if the world had shifted in a way I couldn't undo. I had resigned earlier that day, leaving behind a carefully worded letter that said everything and nothing at the same time. I didn't expect a response, and I didn't get one. She had made her choice, and I had made mine. There was no dramatic confrontation, no last-minute plea. Just silence. And in that silence, I found my answer. The pain didn't vanish overnight. It lingered in the quiet moments, in the way my mind instinctively expected a late-night text, a glance across the office, a reason to believe it had all meant something. But with each passing day, the grip she had on me loosened. I reminded myself that love, real love, wasn't built on half-truths and stolen moments. It wasn't something that needed to be hidden, something that left you feeling like an afterthought when the lights came back on. One evening, I walked past a familiar cafe, one she and I had once visited after a long meeting. The memory of her laughter, the way she had leaned in just a little too close, flickered for a brief second before fading. This time it didn't hurt. I stepped inside, ordering my usual. As I turned, my eyes met someone else's, a stranger's, warm and unfamiliar. They smiled. I smiled back. It was nothing. And yet it was everything. Because for the first time in a long time, I felt something I hadn't in a while, hope. And that was enough.